Hi again, and now it's time to look at the tools. So we'll start off with this first one here, which is known as the line tool. And it works like this. You click on one spot where you want to drag over a note, and every subsequent time you click, you can change directions with that line. So let's click here, and I've only clicked once, but now I'm dragging a line, you can see, and it's snapping to different notes. So I can drag it over to here, for instance. Now if I click again, that now creates an anchor point where I can drag off to another note. So I'll come down here. So I'll just roughly follow the contour of this song. Now, as you can see, I can create diagonal dips as well of any gradient that I choose, but at the moment it's snapping to notes on the vertical axis. So I'll click there, click again here, and I'll run up to here, click there, and so on. Now, when I'm finished, at the moment I needed a single click, so I'm still here. When I'm finished, I'll double click, and that'll sort of sew up the anchor at the other end and give us a finished product. So here we go now. I'll just bypass and show you what I had.
Driving fast, gonna be.
Okay, now I'll put auto-tune back in.
Driving fast, gonna be.
So for all intents and purposes, it was pretty close in that case. But to make it more obvious, I'll do the following. Now, if we go into our options over here, we can see default retune speed for lines. Now in this case we're making lines, so it refers specifically to that, and it's defaulting to 20. So to make it more obvious, let's whack this on 0. So now what's going to happen is the lines I draw are immediately going to have a retune speed of 0, which, as we know, is very dramatic. So I'll just come here, clear what we've got, and try again. So select the line tool, draw a line from here to here, click down to here, click, here, click, here, click, and just that first line, and even go a bit further. I'll go all the way to there, click again, and not even sure what note that's supposed to be, but let's just click there, and now double click here. Now we can see I've gone down to a G natural there, so that should be a G sharp, I think, so we'll hear a flat note now.
Driving fast, gonna be
Right, so you can hear a very dramatic effect now because of the fast retune speed. Now I'll clear that again. This time I'll do it using select all and cut. And we'll cover all those buttons in the next movie. Now as you saw, the vertical axis was snapping to whole notes, and that's because we've got this snap to note button on here. Now if I turn that on and go in with the same approach, so one click here, one click over here, well you can see now I'm a little bit flat. If I come down here, I'm not snapping to notes now. I've got the complete freedom to go anywhere in that vertical axis I want if I want to move things in or out of tune. So I can come down here, and I'm not quite right. I'll deliberately go a bit flat on that one and double click there. So there you have it. Now, if you find that you're actually a little flat or sharp in error, there are easy ways to fix that, and we'll get to that in a couple of minutes. So let's leave it at that for the line tool and move on. Now this next one is the curve tool, and this is pretty cool. This is akin to sort of like a freehand pencil in many ways. So there's no need to click at every breakpoint to create anchors and things like that. It's just completely freehand. So now I'm going to click, hold the button down, and start dragging. And as you can see, I can just paint any picture I like with that. And of course, that probably won't sound too good.
driving fast, gonna be
Now like the line tool, the curve tool is also subservient to this setting here. So now this one, default retune speed for curves. Now that one's down at 20. So again, to make it more dramatic, we can put that at 0 and drag a few things through here. And you can see they're a bit wobbly because it's completely freehand based on my accuracy on the mouse. Now these last two are going to be very fast.
driving fast, gonna be blasted.
So you can hear how electronic those ones are compared to the ones we first did at the beginning. Now don't fret, even if you've got your retune speed a little too fast or a little too slow, that of course is not the end of the story. You can come down here and modify any object accordingly with the retune speed control after the fact. It's not a problem. The preference is just great for those times when you've been using auto-tune for a while and you learn the sort of numbers that work for your material, so you can set a preference just to speed things up. And just to note, the snap to note feature does not work with the curve tool. So even if I turn that back on now, I'm still completely free. As you can see there, I can go anywhere. So not relevant for that tool. Select all and cut. Now let's move on to this one, the make note tool. So like the other ones, this lets us just draw over the area we want and make a note, but it gives us this kind of MIDI piano roll style note display. So we can come along here and correct things that way. Once again, in the options view, default retune speed for note objects this time. So it's very clever the way the three of them can be totally distinguished from each other, and we can use them all in different ways. So this one's currently on 10. This is great for those little spot fixes, really. So we can come along and just listen to a problem area.
Gonna be a blast, and I'm nearly there, people everywhere.
Okay, so she's a little sharp here, for instance. So I can just easily draw on there. Now, as you can see, the note tool doesn't give us any microtonal control. It's always bang on a semitone note. So in that case, I just drag over that B. And you can see here this green line inside there showing us what the new note is versus the red line showing us what was detected. So she was way sharp there, and this will drag her in.
I'm nearly there, people everywhere.
Perfect. And this is cool in other ways too. We can come down to, like this last E that she hits there is kind of a bit sloppy. So you can really nail down things like that very quickly. So now I've nailed down that E. I can even speed up that default retune of 10 if I want, but let's try it.
I'm nearly there, people everywhere.
There we go. So that bottom E at the end of the phrase is much more clearly defined now. So little fixes like that are just a little mouse swipe away and you're good to go. Now just quickly before we move on, in terms of zooming around, you'll see down here there's this waveform display, and no matter what tool I've got selected, so in this case it's the note tool, as soon as my mouse goes down into this area, I get a magnifying glass tool. So without having to switch specifically up here to the magnifying glass tool, I get a limited version of it down here that I can jump around in. Now at the moment you'll see that this main display here and this waveform display here are in absolute visual parity. They're showing the same area. But if I flick this over here from tie, which means it's tied to that display, to all, now this bottom display is showing the complete grab that I've made, whether it's a 5-minute song or in my case it's only a short snippet. But I can now zoom into any area on here and this top display will follow. So if I just want to focus on this first phrase, for instance, there we go, I'm on there. So with this kind of size snippet that I've got now, this display is much more valuable to me than keeping it in this tied mode, which just locks it against that one. So I'm going to stay with that for now. Now, that's using this tool. If I switch over to this tool, same thing. There's our little magnifying glass when I get down here. Line tool, same thing. And in fact, we're going to find that to be the case with every tool up here, which is great and saves us additional mouse clicks that we don't need. But there is one exception to that behavior, and it's the I-beam tool, and we'll discuss that in more detail when we get to it. So next we move on to the arrow tool. Now this is your standard selection tool. Right now, because I've got no objects down here, because I keep clearing them, I can't choose anything. So clicking here effectively does nothing. So what I'll quickly do is select all and just make a curve. So now I've got objects all over the place. Now just as you'd expect, the arrow tool allows me to click on an object and move it. And so move it up and down. But as I displayed earlier, what's also cool is I can grab the anchors themselves and change the tilt of the object. So I can move things in that way. You can also select multiple objects. So I could drag over all those and then move them all en masse. Now, as you can see, I'm being restricted to the vertical axis at the moment, and if I try and go left and right, nothing happens. On some hosts, you can use the Option or Alt key to let you break away into the other axis as well. So if I hold down Option now, I get to drag this to the left or right as well. Now, that's of limited use in certain circumstances, like right now it's not a clever thing to do because I'm moving correction controls beyond where there's actually data to correct, and now things are in the wrong spot. But in some situations, you may need to use that. So it's cool to be able to break away the axis that way. Next up is the scissor tool. Now the scissor tool allows us to split defined objects into smaller sizes. So let's say we're here and on this first line.
Driving fast.
Okay, now for some reason this word fast, which has been detected as one object here, for some reason, let's say we want to break that into two and do different things with each half. So at the moment, everything's selected, so I'll just deselect all that. Now I'll come into here and I can just scissor right in the middle of that, and you can see now that it's broken into two independent objects. Now they're both selected at the moment, so if I drag up now, I end up dragging both. I need to deselect, and now I can grab one or the other and keep them independent of each other. Next up is the magnifying glass, and that's a fairly obvious one. Now slightly more advanced than the version we were showing before where just down here gets the magnifying glass. Now you get to zoom around things in here and not just vertically but also horizontally. So you can zoom into small areas like that. And just like a lot of graphic products now, you can see it's got a plus sign in the magnifying glass at the moment to blow things up. But if I hold down the Alt or Option key, it turns into a minus sign, so I can zoom out with it as well. So you get this sort of thing, zoom in, zoom out, and you can get around your workspace pretty quick that way. Next up is the I-beam, and that allows us to select portions of our track to operate on. So I can drag just over this part here and say I want to import the auto for that section there, which will now override what I've got. Now I want to grab from here to here and use make notes on those ones. And as we've shown before, double clicking in here will select all, but of course clicking the select all button will also select all. So we've got some redundancy with that command. And we can also select things for further editing. So we could drag over just those ones there, then go to our arrow tool and drag things up or down as a group with that. So flexible in that respect. Now just back to that exception I was talking about with respect to the zooming. As we said, when any other tool is selected here, going down into this bottom area here, it turns into a magnifying glass. And you can see that there and see that there. But with the I-beam tool, when we come down to this bottom area here, it remains as an I-beam tool. But what's really cool about this is that it enables us to select things even easier. So for instance, if we want to get to this first phrase now, I can just I-beam over that, and the top display jumps to that with the area actually pre-highlighted for me. So jump over here, there it is highlighted. And now that it's highlighted, it means I can use these controls on it instantly without having to do anything else. So we've changed to that, or we've changed to that, or we've changed to that. So you can zoom around whatever you've got going really quickly. And as you can see, this top screen pre-zooms just to a nice display for you, so you can really jump on things quickly. So that was the one exception to that zooming rule. Next up, we've got the grabber tool. Now, this is cool for times when you're zoomed in too close. So let's say we're down like that and we want to get down to these notes that are under here and see what's happening. Well, now you can just grab and drag the whole thing up and move around that way. But what's also cool is this. If I'm in one of these other tools over here, let's say I'm in the Make Notes tool and I want to get up higher, rather than having to get to the grabber tool now, what's cool is that I can pull my cursor over to the keyboard here and it turns into a little temporary grabber tool. So I can now just drag down that way. And that happens with all these tools. Whatever I'm in here, if I get over to this keyboard, it turns into a temporary grabber tool. So very clever implementation here. No matter what we're in, we get a little mini zoomer here and we get a little mini grabber there. So it's just saving unnecessary trips to the toolbar or jumping on shortcuts that you don't need to. Now these last two here are the Move Point tool and the Move Region tool. Now these work with the new time manipulation features in Auto-Tune, so I won't cover those now. We'll cover those in a couple of movies' time when we deal with time shifting. But before we go on this movie, just one more thing I wanted to show. I'll just jump to the beginning of this phrase again.
Driving fast.
Okay, and I'll just deselect there. Now let's say we make some curves now with the Curve tool. So I'll do some things like that. Now you can see that I'm going to be deliberately, say, flat there. Now I've gone too flat there, and I really want to get that line closer to the center of that note. So of course, one thing I can do is get my arrow tool here, click on this and drag it up. So sure, that works. But an even quicker way, because this one is currently selected, and you can tell because it's got the handles on either side, I can come down here to these nudge buttons and just nudge it up bit by bit. So there you go. So no matter what you've got, you could nudge them up any amount. And it's a really quick way of doing it in really small increments, because if you do it with the arrow key here, the movements might be a little bit too broad unless you zoom in very closely. Whereas here, you're going to get it in little tiny increments every time, no matter what zoom percentage your screen is on. So handy little trick. So thanks for watching this, and stick around for the next movie where we start dealing with the edit buttons up here. See you then.